Now we've got that recorder going. So tonight I'd like to go over a little bit about how you recognize opportunities, how you know whether it's an opportunity or not, the difference between an opportunity and an idea, the kind of the places opportunities come from, and give you a few examples. Of course, you had some time this week already. I hope you've begun the work of the week, or perhaps have read the iLink case, which I'll go over a little bit tonight. But feel free to pop in at any time with a question. And I see various folks are joining the session from time to time, and that's terrific. But as more and more people come in. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about opportunities, and then we're going to look at a number, or at least 3 or 4 different examples of cases, including the iLink case that we had this week. But just to kind of review some of the definitions that we're going to use on opportunity. An opportunity comes because someone has a problem, something that needs to be solved. It's basically an opportunity is a favorable set of circumstances that creates a need for a new product, service, or business. Technology is often identified with opportunities because technology keeps developing new ways to solve problems that may have existed for a long time, or even things that people didn't even know that they needed. So suddenly we have a new technology to do that. You think about the way social media has transformed our world. The need that was going after was a need for human beings to feel a part of a community and to communicate and to be heard. And for years they were watching TV, and so they could listen to the pundits telling them what they should think. And along came social media, and suddenly people had a voice to tell the pundits what they thought. We're still processing that as a society, but that was the need. Oftentimes we talk about an opportunity gap. The gap is when you've got a missing piece. There's something that is needed. It's been missing for a long time, and suddenly you have found a way to fill that need. I don't know if you could see, but I'm wearing a M2D2, a Mass Medical Device Development Center shirt tonight. Just happened to have it on today, and I said I'm going to leave it on because, in fact, what the Mass Medical Device Development Center is an organization that is based at UMass Lowell, but works with the mass medical device development industry and the mass medic industry organizations to try to help companies. One company over there, for example, that works in our incubator and has worked with mass medical development, developed a way of suturing so that you didn't prick your finger when you suture, because if you prick your finger when you suture, you have a huge possibility of contracting diseases, AIDS, hepatitis, and a variety of things. So here was a need, and a couple doctors came up with the idea, and an entrepreneur from UMass Lowell took that idea on and is trying to take it to market. Which is a very difficult thing to do. We know that not every new idea actually can get the market. Once again, since more people have joined, I want to remind everybody that please, if you have a question, either launch it with a chat, raise your hand, or just speak up. I've got my the sound on here so that I should be able to hear you fine too, because I'd love to be able to address any questions that you might have. Okay, so back to this idea of an opportunity and an opportunity gap. Many people confuse a great idea with an opportunity. It may or may not be an opportunity. It's only an opportunity if it's directed at a problem that people will pay for. Um, it has to fill a market need. Now, this is going to form the basis when we come back and we study in detail the Lean Launchpad, because a big part of what the Lean Launchpad is going to do in the future chapter, and that we've talked about in the first chapter, a lot of what they're going to do is called solve a problem. Many other innovations are less radical and are not driven by uh, a desire to uh, you know really change the world, but are just incremental. Incremental, and sometimes called sustaining innovations, are frequently found in larger companies. For instance, General Motors, recognizing over the last decade or so that they needed better fuel efficiency in their trucks, came up with a way of shutting down cylinders. Actually, it had been around for some time, but they have been implementing that much more recently. Um, okay, someone just asked, let me go back and read that. Justin Levino asks, is there week 2 content available? If so, I only see week 1 still. Justin, have you finished the check your knowledge test on week 1? In order to see week 2's content, you have to take that test until you get 100%. So what you do is you take the test, then you go back and go through the test, see which ones you've missed, go back to the material, find out what the correct answer is to that, retake the test until you get 100%. Once you get the 100%, then you will see week 2. Until you get that 100%, you will not see week 2. This is a approach that UMass Lowell takes in a variety of their courses. It's basically a mastery approach, and it's a great way to go through. Okay. Oh, so you got a 90. All right. So it's pretty simple, Justin. Just take it again, find out which one you got wrong, take it again, and I'm sure you'll do better next time. If you still have trouble with that, feel free to correspond with me on the Blackboard email system, and I'll help you through it. But that should be it. Okay, here's back to our discussion of radical versus incremental solutions. So if you're looking around for solving the fuel efficiency problem, you could do something radical like Tesla, or you could do something incremental like General Motors did with their cylinder controls on their trucks. Although General Motors is doing some fairly radical things with its Chevy Volt and Volt. Um, but one could argue whether that's as radical as the Tesla. I suppose not. But they're pretty impressive. They're both pretty impressive vehicles. Everybody is kind of working around on this particular opportunity with fuel efficient vehicles. You hear people predicting all the time that they're all going to be electric in no time, and perhaps that will be true. Time will tell. It's certainly a time of change. Okay. One of the things, the difference between incremental innovation and radical innovation, incremental innovation rarely works for a new business, because if you're coming in to a new business, suppose you say, oh, I'm going to make a pickup truck and I'm going to have some of the cylinders shut off. I'm sorry, you're never going to be able to break into General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, and the Toyota and Nissan and the others who sell trucks because they're way ahead of you. It's only an incremental innovation. You're not going to be able to get into the marketplace. On the other hand, if you could come up with an all-electric car that's faster than most cars around, in some models faster than any car around, like Tesla did, you have a radical innovation which is not easily matched by the existing companies. And so there you have it. Okay. Um, we talked about an opportunity gap. We also have to mention a window of opportunity. I think that's pretty straightforward. I think most of you know what the window of opportunity. What about a business that would license that incremental technology to a larger company? Thanks again for asking that question, Justin. In fact, it's a great question, and you're quite right to point that out, because one way that a new business can use an incremental innovation is by licensing it to a larger company. I have to admit I'm a fan of Shark Tank. I realize that it's kind of contrived and so on, and you know you often see those kinds of things. Uh, yeah, am I a fan of Kevin? Nobody's a fan of Kevin. Everybody dislikes him, but you have to admit that he brings a healthy dose of not very nice reality to the show. So I'm probably a bigger fan of Mark Cuban, to be perfectly honest with you. Although I think Lori is good too. All right, so enough of that. The So the window of opportunity is a key. You have heard about the iLink thing. I'm going to come back to it in a moment. And iLink, when we founded it, honestly, we were a little too early. And our window of opportunity, we had to kind of, find little chunks of the marketplace where we could get in while we waited for that window to open so that we could go big time. And, frankly, we got through that reasonably well, especially as much as technology was changing. But we were too early to the market at first. The internet wasn't even ready to support all the stuff that we wanted to do. So it took us a little while, and we paid with some pain for that being early to the market. So the key thing about this opportunity gap is to kind of answer those questions, which I have adapted from Steve Harper. It's when you can find people that say, if only there was a business that would do this for me. I wish I could buy a product or service that would do this. I wish there has to be a better way to do something. Okay. Examples. One of my favorites, I have to say, and I did love their commercials on Planet Fitness. The no lunks. What's the opportunity gap that Planet Fitness saw? They saw that a lot of the market that might be interested in a fitness center didn't like going in to a gym full of oversized, grunting, weightlifting, health nuts who just intimidate them. And so they came up with a no lung zone, all those great, the first commercial was the one where there's this big guy in the gym, and they come over to him and he says, I pick things up and put them down. And of course, making fun of them as they usher them out the back door. They don't want folks like that. They want folks like you and I that are just kind of normal people that come here. Another example, Tommy John underwear. It was founded because some fella had a big problem with his t-shirt coming untucked, and he hated the bunchiness that he always had around his middle. And so he wanted he wanted to have a T-shirt that wouldn't do that. Okay, that's an opportunity gap. One of the biggest ever was, I wish I could carry my music with me everywhere, the iPod. Okay, if there's older group in the crowd here, you will probably you'll probably remind me that there was a thing called the Sony Walkman that let you take your music with you everywhere, and that is certainly true. Um, so it wasn't an entirely new problem, but iPod did it better. I'm tired of carrying a phone, camera, laptop, computer, and music player around with me, and the iPhone and other smartphones address that opportunity gap. That one was an interesting one because in the discussions this past week about the difference between radical innovation and I'm sorry, between disruptive innovation and creative destruction. Unfortunately, I could tell that many of you were struggling with that concept of disruptive innovation as defined by um, Clayton Christensen, and oftentimes gave examples that were not that. Disruptive innovation occurs when a device goes after an opportunity gap at the low end of the market. Oftentimes, kind of creating, and someone brought up the idea of the camera. Somebody tried to say an iPhone was a disruptive innovation. An iPhone was not a disruptive innovation. It was really more creative destruction. It's just a better technology. It displaced things at the high end of the market from the very beginning. It entered the high end of the market, took over the whole market. The camera on the iPhone, though, was a throw-in, okay? They put a little camera on the iPhone and on other phones, not just on the iPhone, but they put the camera on the smartphone. And the first cameras were not worth, kind of worrying about. And I'm sure that Nikon and Canon and Casio and Pentax and all the camera manufacturers didn't worry about it a bit. It was just a toy. It was a toy camera. It's not going to compete with, big deal cameras, but they got better and better and better. And today, camera sales are plummeting because the iPhone camera and the other smartphones have cameras that can take over the profitable part of the market. So that's what disruptive innovation is about. And the camera on the iPhone is an example, but the iPhone itself is not an example. Cloud computing is an example of an opportunity gap of what was the need that people had. That you work away on your computer at home, you go to the office, you say, "Oh, I forgot to bring those files." Okay, put it up in the cloud. You go to the office, it's right there. There have been a number of efforts to do that, as you know, and of course, a thumb drive is another solution to that same problem. But cloud computing is, I think, pretty much widely agreed that that's going to be the wave of the future. Almost no doubt about that. We gave those 4 criteria. It needs to be durable, so it has staying power. If you come up with a solution, you get in, and it's in a very short time, it's obsolete. No, it's not going to work. We talked about the window of opportunity has to be timely, not too early or too late. iLink was too early. Okay, what do I say Uber is out of these 2 characteristics? And that is, again, a really good question. I think most of you know that I started my career as a scientist and engineer. And you're going to say, what's this got to do with Uber? The interesting thing about science and engineering is that you had right and wrong answers to questions. Then I got into entrepreneurship and management, and I learned that you have good and bad, better and good answers to questions. So Uber is a classic example of where it's a spectrum that you're looking at. Is Uber a disruptive innovation? Many people have called Uber a disruptive innovation. And this is a classic case, in my opinion, where they're misusing disruptive innovation. Why do I say that? Let's go back to what Clayton Christensen, how he defined that. A disruptive innovation enters a low part of the market. It could be an unoccupied part of the market. It could be an unprofitable part of the market. The thing doing the innovation is dismissed at first as not a competitor, and then later grows to devour the whole market. So if you look at Uber and you ask, how does it fit with that definition? Uber did not come in at the bottom of the market. It did not take over an unprofitable part of the market. In fact, it was much more profitable because it was a much better business model. So we're going to study Uber in a little more detail later, but Uber is an example of a business model innovation. And a business model innovation is a change in the way that you interact with the customer. This business model innovation for Uber, frankly, is creative destruction. It is so much better than the existing business model that it just has really taken over the marketplace. Not completely driven out taxis yet, but taxis' greatest hope is government and regulation. Wouldn't I consider the low-end market as a commodity such as a taxi service, though? Okay. When we say you take over the low end of the market, you're not talking about a low-end market. When we're talking about the low end of the market, you define the market, right? First. And the market here, which is a commodity, a taxi service, you could call it low end, you could call it high end, I don't care. But take that market, once you've defined it as a low end market or a high end market or a commodity market or whatever you want to define it, Uber did not go in as a toy in the bottom of that market as is defined. That's the difference between, kind of the way you're talking about a low end market. Okay? Uber came in with a new business model and took over the market at the more profitable end. One of the things, it's the placement good, thank you, that you put it right down in writing, right where I was going. It's not the particular market, whether the market is low end or high end, it's the placement in the market that is being targeted. Remember, the example in one of his first research was steel. So if you take a market as steel, they targeted rebar, which is cheap, junky steel that you put in concrete to reinforce it. And they got into that part of the market, and then they made better and better steel, so that they could begin to sell it to automobile companies and eventually even to medical device companies. There's a whole gradation in the market of steel. So you're right, it is the placement in the market. It's well said. And that helps you, see why Uber, in fact, was more creative destruction. They put out a business model that was so much better than the competition that it's just great. Yeah, that's terrific. That it clears up that confusion. But I keep coming back to that business model because business models are so powerful, and of course that's where we're going to be going in the next couple of weeks. Talk about business models and show how, if you come up with a better business model, as Uber did, and think about their business model. I'm going to be doing this in a few weeks, but since we're on Uber as in this case creative destruction, their business model was they don't own the car. Their business model's evolved. I'm going to give the business model at the beginning, right? They don't own the car. They don't provide the insurance on the car. They don't have the driver as an employee. And all of a sudden, they don't have any of that capital. They don't have all that liability. They have some liability, but they don't have the liability that a taxi service. They don't have the regulations. And they did have the internet to contact them, but taxi services could use the internet too to book a taxi, right? That's not the big part of the business model. The big part of the business model was the whole idea of taking individuals that already owned cars and had some spare time and to be able to use the internet and the computer to organize that and deliver it all over the place. That was the power of the business model. And boy, has that, uh, you know, even though it's not disruptive innovation, it certainly was disruptive. And that's why it is so confusing about disruptive innovation. I understand that confusion. I wish that Clayton Christensen had come up with a different term because that throws people off. Um, okay, we talked about the those four essential qualities that would be attractive. Um, oh, okay. So there's no Uber in Haiti. I didn't understand. I didn't know that. No. Okay. Which I'm surprised if. Um, but okay. So we're talking about the opportunity is being an attractive, okay, durable. You want it to last, timely, and anchored in a product or service that creates value. So that's just basically a summary of those points. Now I want to tell you an example, and here's the first. I'm going to do about three different quick examples, and then I'm gonna we'll move on. First, here's one that from right down the road from well, some of you are all over the country, so but right down the road from UMass Lowell is the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, Massachusetts. Uh, at that UMass Biologics Lab, which actually is not in Worcester, that's in Mattapan, I guess it is, closer to Boston, but it's part of the UMass Medical School. And they did research and they developed a monoclonal antibody for rabies. It's incredible. It is incredible. They developed a monoclonal antibody for rabies, spectacularly more effective than the current treatment regimen of a 30-day series of rabies shots. It reduced the cost of treatment dramatically, 100 times, and it reduces the suffering of persons being treated. Now, I have to say, maybe I get too excited about this. I had to be treated by rabies. I was riding bikes with my son when he was very, very young, and a fox came running out of the woods, leaped up on my son and began to attack him rather viciously, and I jumped in to pull the fox off, and it was the fight of my life. I fought 250-pound men that fought, less than this fox did. And of course, we both ended up in the hospital. And my son and I had a father-son bonding experience of going through 30-day series of rabies treatments. So let me tell you, when I heard this, I knew that it was a great idea. I mean, better than a great idea. It was a phenomenal idea. Okay, so probably we all agree on that. I hope none of you had to go through rabies treatment the way my son and I did, but hey. And now, comes the reality. And, this is where you might think I'm a big fan of Kevin, Mr. Wonderful, Justin. But it's because now we're going to get hard-headed, right? We got a great idea. Isn't it a great opportunity? What do we need for an opportunity? Okay, we just talked about that. It needs a market ready, willing to pay for the alternative. Is it attractive? Yeah. Is it durable? Probably. So let's look at this in a little more detail now. Okay. All right. So we get right down to the customer discovery process, we're going to call it when we do the Lean Launchpad. Is this a great opportunity? Is there a huge need and demand for this product by a group that's willing to buy it? I guarantee you, I would have bought it, okay? But I'm one. Okay, I have my son, that's two. Begin to add this up over the United States, and you begin to ask yourself, we've identified a small market. Is there enough economic incentive to create a business and justify the investment? What kind of investment would be needed to bring this to market? The market is pretty small. And the cost, you're really talking of a cost in the billions of dollars to bring a drug to market. So it would cost us over $1 billion to bring this drug to market, and we don't have $1 billion worth of people willing to pay for it. That is heartbreaking. That is heartbreaking. But unfortunately, it is the truth. Yeah, financially you have to, okay? You have no choice. A conclusion, which I just brought up on the slide, which was well introduced by Dustin's comment. He'd run from this opportunity. There is no viable U.S. market to justify the investment. There is no immediate U.S. opportunity. It is too expensive, takes too long to reach a small market. It's agonizingly sad, absolutely true, and unfortunately not at all unusual in the medical field. But we didn't give up. We didn't quit. We realized that in India, rabies is endemic. There are tens of thousands dying each year. They can't afford to treat the many, many patients of rabies. That's why so many die. The cost is too high. 30 days is too hard to keep in touch with the patient. Maybe there's something here. Maybe we could license that monoclonal antibody to an Indian company for development, which would have lower costs to bring it to market and a huge market. And then maybe, if we're successful with this and it's established in India, maybe we could bring it back to the United States. In other regions with fewer patients, not enough to support this. Well, in fact, that is exactly what we decided to do. We decided that we would license it into India and then hopefully bring it back to the United States. That is in process now. And so it is, I popped ahead too soon. And so you can watch the news over the next few years to see whether or not we're able to do that, to get this product to market. Okay, that was a rough one. I certainly agree that, it was hard for us to see this happen, and we didn't like it very much, but it was the truth. It was the cold, hard truth. Okay, I'm going to jump over now to, let's see, I want to see if there's another slide I have in this bunch. Hold on a second here. I'm looking. My computer's decided to be annoying and not want to do what I wanted it to do. Here's the slide that I was trying to get to. Good. All right. Finally got that computer to respond to me. Now, here are some of the things that when we're trying to identify this opportunity that we're going to look for. We're going to look for, are there economic forces working for us? What's happening in the economy? What's happening with people's income? What's happening with people's spending? Are there things there that are going to drive an opportunity? What social forces are out there? Social, cultural, demographic, trendiness. Of course, social forces, the most famous one of all, which is just about to it's in its final throes of transforming society, but in 1945, the baby boomers began to be born. And you look from 1945 to today, the baby boomers generation has pretty much distorted markets in different ways. Right now, the baby boomers are distorting markets all around issues of aging and retirement. But this too shall pass, and you have new generations coming in. These are demographic forces, but you also have trendiness kinds of things. Um, and of course, we always talk about technologies. And technologies, you can have new technologies that are emerging, or you might find new uses for old technologies that kind of cycle back. The other forces that are out there that you have to pay attention to are political forces. You have forces in the political arena, and you have regulatory forces. Let me give you some examples of opportunities created there. In Massachusetts, a few years ago, we formed a clean energy center, and that was formed by the legislature and by the governor. It was Governor Deval Patrick at the time that began some of that. Actually, some of it started under Mitt Romney before that, so it's been Republicans and Democrats alike that started this Clean Energy Center. As part of that, we set up a regulation that mandated that the that the utility companies had to buy solar energy if you install solar cells on your roof. That would had to buy solar energy from you at retail. So they sell you at retail, and they had to buy it at retail. And we had a tax credit that was available for that. Those are political and regulatory issues that have, caused tremendous growth of solar energy in Massachusetts. And so those are the forces that can really change things. Now, an example that I want to pick out of that would be Tesla Motors and their all electric, cars. Um, the the interesting thing about Tesla, and this was the first Roadster that they released. It's an incredible car. I want to get one. I had a chance to drive it, but I'd love to have one just as a collector. Um, it went after all the forces. The economic trend, increasing gas prices. So they come out with a car that is, um, you know, doesn't use any gas. Can't do better than that. Um, Social trend. People socially want to be seen as being green, want to be seen as being environmentally friendly, don't want to be seen as being, uh, you know, conspicuous consumers. Not everybody, of course, but that is a social trend, and certainly Tesla took advantage of that. Technology advances. They made battery and motor improvements and came up with a battery arrangement that used kind of standard cells, but put them in an array which could power this car and be used as the base frame for keeping the weight low, keeping the center of gravity low, and everything. Technology advances and the political regulatory trend. You got very favorable tax treatment and support for alternative energy systems. So Tesla Motor was one of the few examples you can find out there that went after all of the four trends: economic, social, technology, and political regulatory trend. Um, so uh, we talked about Uber before. That fit nicely with the social trend, the gig economy, for example, and the desire to earn a little, money on the side. The desire to have a car that would, a little nicer car, not an old taxi cab taking you places. So it had a social trend. Um, the economic trend that it had going in its favor for Uber was a desire to need to make extra money on the side in the younger generations, the millennials and so on. Technology advances a little bit in the sense that the internet was available and people now had smartphones. You could put an app on your smartphone, use the network to be able to, quickly call, track when the car was going to get to you, and so on. The political regulatory trend, though, was against Uber. because taxis were supposed to be licensed and regulated, and you were supposed to buy, these big taxi licenses, and your drivers were specially vetted and everything. And so Massachusetts tried to ban Uber, but people went so crazy that they quickly backed off that. Some places have banned Uber, and other places are threatening to ban Uber. And we put regulations on Uber in Massachusetts, and other places have put regulations on it. So Tesla has, Tesla, Uber has benefited from the economic trend and the social trend to a certain extent, and the technology advances, but it certainly has to been swimming upstream against the political regulatory trend, and it's still not entirely clear that they will be successful at that. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I'm going to go over and just tell you a little bit about iLink, the company that I founded, which also happens to be a pretty good example, which will almost create a spine that we can hang a lot of the things that we're going to be learning on. It's a nice little case study that just happens to have a lot of the things that we'll be talking about over the next few weeks. So we'll be able to come back and have a look at this. Of course, I couldn't help but print the fact that when we made the front page second section of the Wall Street Journal, and there's a picture of iLink there, and you won't be surprised to note that it had many of the features back in the 90s that you're using in Blackboard right now. So let's talk about the opportunity recognition. What was life like in the 90s? I know you don't remember. I'm going to tell you, okay? I happen to be, of age at that time, and there's a few people in this class that are old enough to remember the 90s well, and a few that may not remember it as well. Here's what was happening in the 90s. Suddenly, the internet was just breaking onto the scene. Cell phones were, kind of developing. They were at an early stage, and there were these rapid changes in technologies. Personal computers had really come onto the scene in the 80s. They were taking over things. The internet started in the 80s, but it was really going gangbusters in the 90s. Globalization was occurring. Things were happening all over the world. It was intense economic competitive. New companies were coming out all the time, all over the place. Existing companies had to adapt. Their employees had to learn new things. It was a tough time for engineers, I have to say, at that time, because engineers would graduate from college, they would go out and they'd go to work, and in 2 years, everything they learned in college was obsolete in terms of technologies and computer science and a lot of fields like that. They had to be constantly learning. Well, employee training, as they deployed all these new computer systems and order entry systems and everything, is very expensive, especially for large firms. And they oftentimes flew. Companies back in those days had huge training centers. Some of them still do, but most of them are gone now, sold off. Verizon had one right down in Marlborough, which it was sold off to a Chinese company some time ago. But they used to fly or drive or bus or however their employees to Marlborough, put them up in a hotel in the center and provide the training. Office Depot would fly them to Boca Raton, Florida. GTE would bring them up, into a Boston training area. Xerox would take them to a suburban Virginia area, and boy, is that expensive. Is there an opportunity to do something to bring this down? Well, let's talk about what was happening in technology. I love to show this graph because anybody that didn't live through it doesn't understand what was happening with the development of new companies. Look at the market value. It looks like exponential growth. For those with a mathematical background, you'll know that exponential growth is a lovely, lovely thing that exists in mathematics but does not exist in physics or engineering, because it always breaks in the end. It can't just keep rising like that. It's just physically impossible for that. So something happens, but that's what was happening. The internet tsunami, they were calling that. And okay, we, we decided that there was an opportunity here. We could make a system which would let them train their employees at their desks. We founded it in 1993 called iLink. We changed the name to LearnLink. We did a triple reverse merger and called it Mentorgy. But let's look at a little bit about the detail. I'm going to let you read about this, but I want to make the point that a lot of the things that the new products you see began in a research lab. That's where ours began. I was doing research in internet and high performance computing and came up with, just to work with other scientists, I was working on the internet and we came up with collaborative tools. And then AT&T, I gave a speech to a group of AT&T execs talking about how the internet was going to let you work wherever you were and be able to work together. And when I did that, the AT&T execs were so excited about the whole thing. It was such a hit with the audience that they asked me if I would build a prototype for them, which I did. And we released it, and they loved it. It was called WorldWorks. They come out with a new product called WorldWorks. I was your classic professor. I went in and said, oh, but the technology's changed so dramatically now. This new product that I got you, it was wonderful in its day, but now it's obsolete. Talk about durable or not durable. It was a not durable product, right? Because the technology had changed. And I said, if you'd like, and you'll give me more money, I will build it for you right this time. They declined. So when they declined, I continued on research, recruited a couple of my students to work with me on the research. And, Derhan Uslawel was this brilliant, he was an MBA student at that time, but he had been an electrical engineer and a former entrepreneur. And he recruited one of his friends, Mark Bernstein, a few from Computer Associates Top Gun, and they wanted to start the company and they asked me to lead it. And so we were off and running. And this is us. We were all dressed up in tuxes. We didn't go to work that way every day, just so you know. We were just being honored because we gave a couple $1 million to, we were then at RPI, and so they were very happy. So we dressed up in a tux for the occasion. You started some scholarship stuff. Okay, but that's the end of the story. Let's come back. What are the things that you have to think about? And we're going to think about in this course. If you're going to start a new venture of this type, you have to decide what you want it to be. We've talked about the different kinds of companies. It could be a lifestyle company, right? It could be a salary substitute. Maybe we want to start a company and we'd want to work in this company making this software, forever and work in it for the rest of our lives. That would be a salary substitute company. But that wasn't what we wanted to do. We wanted to create a public company, and we needed an exit strategy, meaning a way that we would get out of that company and be able to harvest the benefits, the profits of that company through an IPO or an acquisition. And we all agreed that we wanted to do that. So that was our first step. If one of us had wanted to start a company and run it for the rest of his life, like an auto dealership or a restaurant or something like that, we'd have been on a different page. But we all agreed. This was our business model canvas. I'm going to save this for when we come back to studying the business model canvas in a week. And we're going to take a look at it, but you should, have a look at this, because today, this is really how you begin to organize your thoughts for explaining things to investors and to yourself, really, about how you organize your business. We're going to go into this in great detail. This is a business model canvas I did recently because it did not exist when we were doing iLink. So we didn't have a business model canvas at that time. We had to figure out about intellectual property You know that on Shark Tank, if you're fans of Shark Tanks, everyone always says, do you have a patent on that? How you protect your intellectual property? Um, we had to decide it would be possible to patent what we had developed, but and if we did that, it would protect our intellectual property and keep competitors out, but I could not be sure. Um, the disadvantage would be that we would have to go through the long, expensive patent process, and if we didn't do that, we could just get right to market. And there was a potential dispute with AT&T because of the work that we had done there. Instead, AT&T was our first customer, so we chose not to patent it. And I frequently go through that. We created a prototype, which we're going to see uh, is very similar to what in the lean launch pad we call the minimum viable product. And we took it out to customers and began to sell it. I'll let you read the rest of this. You kind of recognize these screenshots. These were screenshots taken in the 90s, so the quality of the screen was not great. But frankly, I like the interface we had better than the Blackboard interface, which is pretty much copied from us. Of course, we had to go out and find the money to do this. And we did find that money to do that. We first went out and sold vaporware. We went to companies and said, if you'll give us $300,000 now, in 6 months to a year, we'll give you all this software, but you have to pay in advance. Success Magazine wrote us up and called it the Wimpy method because in an old cartoon, Popeye the Sailor Man, Wimpy was always coming by and saying, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. So I'll gladly send you software Tuesday for $300,000 today. That was our model. So they made fun of us, but they also patted us on the back because we actually made it work. And we had great first customers, and we got an Air Force SBIR. When we talk about financing, we'll talk about the various places you go for financing, and these were some of the places that we went for financing. Then, of course, we had to build the product. And after building the product, the good news is we won lots of awards for our work. Okay. I'm going to stop now and let you, kind of finish the rest of this case on your own after this one. As we went forward, though, we were slow to go after venture capital. And but then we realized that we needed to have more working capital. We were tired of me co-signing loans because I was the only one that owned a house and cars and all that kind of stuff. So it was all my assets at risk. I wasn't fully disclosing to my wife and children that I was putting their future at risk, to be perfectly honest. I wanted to get out of that. And so we started going after venture capital. They asked me then to leave the place where I was at a university permanently and, just continue to be the CEO of iLink. But instead, I fired myself as the CEO, stepped up to the chairman of the board and hired a new CEO, went through more rounds of venture capital. Eventually, we ended up as a $500 million company. But I'll let you read about how it went on from there because I really want to stop this as we're getting to the end of the hour, and I don't like to go on more than an hour. Intel was an investor, which was terrific with us. This is the crew some years later after we developed a little more gray hair. We're not a very good looking group, but I would say that we were probably a better looking group than the Microsoft group. If you look at the picture of that in the last chapter. So, all righty, I'll quit there. Any questions that I can answer before I call it a night? If there are no further questions, then, Justin, thank you. You're very kind. I appreciate that. Glad you were able to make it. I'm glad that you all were able to make it tonight. and enjoyed having you on board. You guys have asked good questions and made good points. I appreciate it. So we'll be, chatting a variety of ways over the next week, and I hope we'll see you next week. Ralph, great to see that you got it here. Have a good night, all the way down in Haiti, where it's probably a little warmer than it is in Lowell. All right. Take care, everybody. Good night. Oh, yeah. Good night.